All right, now that you have your unit scope and sequence done, now you need to do the document or documents or resources you will use to communicate the unit outline, the unit plans, and the expectations to your students. And so I'm going to show you the example I used when I taught biology. This is a document I handed out on day one of the unit with my students, and then they use this all throughout the unit to keep track of what they learned and what it meant. And I call that sense making. And they did that each day. They filled this out to keep track of what they did and then make sense of it. And by the end of the unit, if they had done this well, they had created their own study guide that made sense to them, that outlined the entire unit and all the contents of the unit. So I'm going to talk you through my example and why I have the pieces in there I do. Now, you can use this example if you want. You can use this exact template if you want, if you think it's age appropriate and subject appropriate. Biology is a high school course that's very content heavy, lots of vocab, lots of information. So this works well for that. But this wouldn't work well for elementary students. They might have a hard time with it. And it wouldn't work well for like a Phy-Ed class where I don't want them to have a piece of paper. So what I want you to keep very close eye on is not necessarily how I have it organized on here, but the information that's on here. And then what you will have to do is create your own tool that you're going to use with your students. And it's the thing you're going to start using on day one and you would use throughout the unit. And so it can be this one again. You can take my model and copy it and steal it. That's fine. But if not, then you need to come up with another way you're going to do it. So for example, I've had students that are doing elementary school or elementary classes, and they are creating one of these, but they do it as a smartboard document. So each day they can have a page that shows them what's the question we're addressing. And then each day they would have another one that would help them pull the pieces together and do the sense making. And they would do that all as a class on like a smartboard, and kids could come up and they could add a piece to it. I've had other students do it as a poster that they put up in the classroom. Others do it as some kind of electronic document. But so the organization and what it looks like isn't important. You get to decide that and make it appropriate for your subject, your physical space, and the age of students you're teaching. But what you do have to do, and no matter what it looks like, you have to include this information. So let's start with, first thing it does is it communicates the questions to the students. So here are all the questions we're going to be answering during this unit. It's got the thematic question, the sub-thematic question in my case, and then the guiding questions. So it outlines, so there, right there is their outline of what we're going to learn. And then in this case, I provided a vocabulary list for each unit. I did that because as a very content, information heavy subject, and because of the assessments I was using, I wanted them to have this as almost a checklist for a study guide. If they could go through this, and if they knew all those terms, that at least got them started on the K's of the K to U. And then from there, they could look at the assignments and figure out, what do I have to do with this information and what do I have to understand with it? And then I give them space to record every day what was the assignment or the activity. In this case, I would have them also look at the guiding questions and have them figure out what activity or how that activity fit with what guiding question. This helps it to serve as a study guide. So when they're studying and they're thinking, what do I need to know for guiding question 1? Then they could see, oh, we did this lab on it, so I should look at that lab and read my conclusion on that lab, and that would help me study for guiding question 1. I would also have them keep their score. That's so they can keep track of how they're doing in the class and own that. And in my case, I had them make corrections if there was anything wrong on anything handed back to them, and so they could track whether they had made those corrections or not. And then the last piece that it organizes and communicates to them is the summative, the assessments at the end of the unit and the end of the half of the unit, in this case with the sub-thematic questions. And so it's telling them, here's what we're shooting for. If you can do those things And by doing these things here, that will allow you to demonstrate your mastery of the guiding questions, the subthematic questions, and eventually the thematic question. So that's the information that needs to be communicated as part of the roadmap. And I call this the outline and table of contents in my case, because it's outlining for them what do we have to know for this unit, and then what did we do in the green part, and then eventually how am I going to be assessed on it. So that's the information that needs to be communicated. What are the expectations for the assessment, and what are the guiding questions? The other pieces, this vocabulary part, if that's not appropriate, you don't have to use that. That was appropriate for my example. But then also some way for them to track what they're doing every day. And again, that could be something they do on their own, on paper, or it could be something you do as a whole class with younger students. So that's part of task 2, is communicating that information. The other part is to give them a tool to do the sense-making part. And that's the part where they make sense of what they did and track it. So I really like this learning map. This is a learning map designed by Jim Knight in his book High Impact Learning. And I use this with students to have them track the unit. And you can almost read this. So matter and energy is about the process of life on a recycling energy and recycling matter by using photosynthesis through cell respiration, by cycling through the carbon cycle. And so you'll notice here that what I did is I took the content described in the guiding questions, and then I looked for the key things, and I pulled out 3 key things: photosynthesis, cell respiration, and the carbon cycle. And so now what the students would do each day is they would build their own concept map by starting by adding bubbles of the things that they learned that in the activities, and they would put them on here, and then they would link those to the proper categories. And what they would find, and the reason I did it this way, I like this one, instead of just listing the questions, is they might find that the assignment that they did or that topic that they write here connects to 2 things. And so they can start to see the connections between things. And so it allows them to develop this learning map that is as detailed as they want to make it, that has the information on it and how that information connects to the bigger picture. And then from that, they would have completed a rough outline of the final essay I'm going to have them write for this class and the final project they're going to do. But it could also serve as just a study guide for an exam you were going to give. So I like this one because it lists the information a little differently than the questions. And I think that's valuable because it helps them process the information. So on this side, they're just looking at the questions and they're creating a sequential list. Here's what we did. And then on this page, they're adding in the information and more connections and depth about the information to keep track of why they did it and what it means. So between the two, they get the what, the why, and what let's see, they get the what they did, the why they did it, and then the meaning of what they did. Now, there's also in the book, I provide an example on the next 2 pages of some different ways to do learning maps that build around the questions, and that's fine too. Now, keep in mind, this learning map is what I used with high school students. You could use something like this, and you could steal my example, or you could use examples in the book. If you don't think that works for your unit, you can create something else. Or if you don't think this is something students could do on their own, you could decide, okay, we'll do it as a smartboard document, and every day we'll have students add things to it, and they could come up and write things on the smartboard, and then we could draw connections and talk about it and use it as a way to process as a group. Whatever is appropriate. The key thing here is, notice what we have. We have a means of communicating what's the unit about, what are we doing in it, and then what are the assessments, and then some way to do the processing each day with each lesson of why did we do it and where does it connect to. And so I use this format for this, but you wouldn't have to. You could create your own format. It might look completely differently. It might even be just something you're going to do as you fill this piece out together. So you have to create your own means of communicating the expectations to students and providing them a tool to do the sense-making processing.